should also follow the monitoring of water levels, and we should promote options for rainwater harvesting and groundwater recharge, and we should bring in communities' role in managing all their water resources, and we should be having effective water monitoring systems in place, which can effective water systems, so that we could quickly restore them once the floods are or the disasters are over. Next slide, please. And investment, as I said, we should focus investment and financing. And currently, we see that only a very fraction of this global climate funding goes into the adaptation measures, and then those also go not to the extremely poor countries. For example, after 20 countries receiving the most climate funding for water program, only 19 of them are middle income countries. So the world has to focus the poorest of the poor countries. There are some very good case stories from different countries around the world, which tells us the interlinkage between the effects of the climate change and the vulnerabilities that it brings to the communities. And a very good annex. Faria. Just one, yeah, and a good annex that show us the interesting statistics on climate vulnerability and its impact on linked with the access to water and adapting financing. I'm very sorry, I've taken a lot of time on this, but that's all about from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Munawar. It was a very comprehensive presentation on the state of world water. We should now move on to our specialist, water specialist from UNICEF, Mr. Prakash Raj Damsal.
Thank you, Faria. Hope you can hear me.
Yes, I think we all can, and I'm gonna put up your presentation.
And good morning to everyone. Let me first start saying very happy World Water Day to everyone. I'm here with my colleague Kamran and Jiggy. So as you see my presentation, I'm going to present mainly around the Imagine WAS, which is basically water security for all. And in fact, like, it's kind of like, you know, it's good that Munawar has given all the state of the WAS. He clearly outlined the situation, the challenge, the issues. So then what next? How are we going to kind of address some of those issues? So that's where my presentation would be focused around this area, which is basically the UNICEF recently launched this water security for all kind of initiative. So which is basically that efforts that we like to kind of contribute to the global programs and our advocacy priorities. It is nothing very different other than putting more emphasis, putting more efforts to working with the government, civil societies, community, private sectors to increase the access of safe water, sanitation, and hygiene, to address, as Munawar mentioned, that to address some of those environmental degradations and climate change for sustainable environment. So our whole idea is to make sure that we ensure the water security for future. In short, like water secure future for children, as we are more like, you know, mandated to work around the well-being of the children. So we are really tagging children in one of those initiatives. So here in this slides, you see that kids like, you know, waiting for water to get for a drinking purpose. I mean, this kind of situation is very common, like when it comes to any developing countries. So not necessarily here in Pakistan, I mean, in almost in every developing countries, we have gone through these kind of situations. So when you're talking about this theme of today's All Water Day, valuing water, so you don't need to ask so many questions. Don't need to think of so much of about what is the value of water. You just simply think about these children, this child, and see and what is the status of those water points. So that gives you the clear picture. So what is the value of water? So it's not about the price. That's what I'm trying to say here. It's about all this complexity of like value of water when it comes to household, at the institution like in schools or in a workplace where it's all about health, your dignity, and your kind of productivities. In the case of the education, because it has very link with all the child survival, child development, and child survival. So this is beyond, goes to the pricing of the water. So, but the with the increase of the, I mean, the populations and growing demands, so we see the water scarcity, and we see the lot of those water stress areas where it reduces the livelihood opportunity for the people and the communities, and sometimes it's leading to the migration, and could be a driver for the conflict, and could be the conflict because of result of the water scarcity. So that forced any child to be a labor. So those are the areas that we really want to address. And also, as Munawar just mentioned, that climate change is another kind of, the water scarcity, compounding kind of water scarcity through the changing of the participation patterns that we have seen from his presentation. So it's really important to value of the water at your home, at your family, for your life and livelihood and well-being of all the people. But today the water is under the very extreme threat from all these kind of like the issues that are raised by the Munawar kind of presentations. So what we did, in fact, UNICEF, we come up with this extreme water vulnerability kind of index. And then we look at the water stress, kind of like water scarcities, and the level of water services people are receiving at this moment. So we come up this kind of figure that globally 1.42 billion people are living in a very extreme kind of water vulnerabilities, which include the 450 millions of children, which is, if you look at the Pakistan case, here it comes around almost 26 millions of those children in Pakistan. They live in this extreme water vulnerabilities, and which really have an impact at their physical development, and which create a kind of malnutrition and stunting. So it's very kind of like, challenging situations. If you continue doing the business as usual, we may not be able to reach our SDG goal, our target, whatever we have committed globally. So we need to think something differently to address all these issues. Can I have for next slide, please? Yes. So quickly, I think it's very much, this part is very much covered in our presentations. So climate change is one of those which causes the water insecurity. So that I don't need to go into that details, because in Pakistan, we have seen very, the frequent episode of flood, droughts, melting of those glaciers. So it shows that there is a really threats. And also the conflict and migration, that can be, like I'm talking about, could be at the community level, or could be the can be also the source or results of conflict and migrations. So community compete for the sharing of water sources, and which may cause the family are forced to leave their home for the search of the reliable water and livelihood opportunities. And definitely population growth and demands kind of like, with the high demand of water can cause the water insecurities. And with the living standard, with high living standards, it also requires more water to use. So those are the some of those water insecurity causes of water insecurities. And lastly, the poor water management and misuse. Definitely, it's all about the people behavior and how they, have a kind of knowledge and attitude, and what are their practice in terms of managing or misusing kind of water. So, which is if the people they don't perceive the water as a kind of like resources, scarce kind of resources, and definitely like there will be poor management of the water, and it's also create kind of water insecurity in futures. Next slide, please. So that's why, as I saying that if you continue working as usual, we may not able to achieve our SDG target. So that's why we really need to think about how we're going to do something differently. What will be our reimagining of the WAS to assure the water security for all? So that's the kind of like global agenda at this moment. And definitely will be here the climate resilient WAS service is coming more pronouncedly. I mean, that's the area where we think that we need to work more around having an impact, looking at the impact of the climate change. And other area, what I see that very much like we are trying to focus in bringing the private sectors, how we're going to engage the private sectors and they get their kind of like contribution in terms of, achieving all those kind of results. So, and also other one is like, if there is any areas where we see that where there is a kind of like crisis, so we may need to look at the how we're going to look at the early actions and early response. So these are the four areas, these are the dimension of the four areas that we going to focus. But it's not necessary that all these four dimensions we're going to focus in every country. Depending on the country situations and the need, we're going to, use one or any combination of these four to address some of those challenges. Next slide, please. So here are the details, like how we're going to scale up, how we're going to look at those dimensions, how we're going to scale up. As I mentioned that it's very country specific, not necessary that we're going to look at all those four dimensions, but depending on the need, we're going to, look around either one or any combination of these four. But going through all these different dimensions, safe and affordable drinking water services, which is basically that's what we have been continuing doing. So as you said, like developing a plans which assure that there is we are not leaving anyone behind, and looking at what are the bottlenecks and addressing those bottlenecks, and sustainable the delivery of the sustainable water services. Similarly, in the case of dimension 2, which is very much linked with the climate resilient water service and communities. So that's the area where we feel that we need to, put more emphasis in futures, because this is something area like we really need to, as a water sector, we really need to focus. And it's good that we are working closely with the Ministry of Climate Change. That's where I see it's kind of like, added benefit for the future work. Which basically looking at the risk analysis and developing a vast climate kind of rational at the national level, and reducing the carbon footprint by installing some sort of like solar panel systems. So these are the areas we can look at, like how we're going to scale up those areas. And similarly, prevent water sorry, can you go back to the previous slides? Yes. Third one is prevent water scarcity crisis through the early actions. Like basically, like here in terms of Pakistan, looking at those drought, flood, and melting of the glacier, probably it's also one area where we can think of like what, how we can like look at the innovative way of like working around the early warning systems, and then probably in some of cases where we have a drought, we may think of groundwater modeling. So these are some of the areas that we really need to focus in futures. So lastly, it's a water cooperation for peace and stability. This one is basically for the like kind of like where we have a huge response around the humanitarian response, but it may not be like it may not be applicable in Pakistan. But if there is any those kind of like where we see the WAS can bring the peace and stability within the some sort of like within the community or within the village, then that's the area where we need to think of like working in this dimension. Next slide, please. So how are we going to, what are our strategy? How are we going to achieve those, whatever the dimension we have kind of like come up with? So these are the four like strategy where something that we need to accelerate it, what we are doing at this moment. And then, for instance, is like this advocacy part, and then financing and capacities, mobilizing the private sectors, and making use of young people. So these are the very, the broadly, but I can explain you more details in the next slides. Can you go to the next slides, please? Yes. Here, more or less like it's also very much linked with our kind of like presentations. So here we are more focusing on how we can tap the resources, how we can work with the government around the climate change. So that are our area to be focused in coming days. So for instance, supporting government to integrate vast priorities into climate policies, strategies such as NAP, NDCs, which we have been doing, and that also improve the water cooperation between different users. Like we have agriculture sectors, we have water resources, water supply. So there needs some sort of cooperation among all the users, and then integrate the conflict sensitivity plans into our systems. So second, accelerated financing and capacities. So here, looking at the local capacity, how we can develop the capacity of the around the looking at the climate risks, how we can support the local government or local kind of like stakeholders, their capacity in terms of like addressing the climate risks, and then attract the innovative financing kind of like funding, which include the climate financing. So third one is mobilize and leverage business and innovations. So here also trying to tap the private sector here, which could be the water utilities or service provider, and make use of them in terms of scaling up the innovations and professionalizing some of those services. And looking at the water efficiency, quality, and treatment. And lastly, the other one is the young people. And in Pakistan, we have a huge percentage of the young people. And you have probably noticed that through the Clean Green Pakistan kind of initiatives, we have already registered so many youth champions. So make use of those young people as a champions and agent of change in terms of sustainable use and management of water. And by strengthening those social and human capital, by providing them a life kind of skill training, or use them as a volunteers as a workforce. So which we have been started doing in the Clean Green Pakistan movement. Can we have next slide, please? Yes. So where do we want to concentrate some of those our efforts? So definitely as an UNICEF, we are more are mandated to ensure that all the children receive their utilize or realize their rights of water and sanitation. But we look at those vulnerable community, look at those people living in an extreme vulnerable kind of condition. Let's start from there. And then identify those geographical areas based on those kind of criteria, what we just mentioned, that water vulnerability index, which is basically combination of the water scarcity and the demand level. So looking at those kind of like an index, we can think of like where we like to focus. And then, as you know that this water scarcity level are likely to increase in future. That's why like UNICEF come up with this water game plan, where we really have a kind of very clear strategy how we're going to, provide more access to the safe water and sanitation services. Can I have my last slides, please? Yes. So I don't want to go into that details, but UNICEF, we have looked at the service level in terms of water stress area. So those people who are in a water stress area having a very low level of service level, like using a surface water, they are more vulnerable. And those who are using unimproved water services, they are next to, the vulnerable. So those are the people having a limited service and basic service. So we want those, identify those locations and those peoples, and then take them to the safely managed kind of things. So I don't want to discuss very much on a basic plus kind of things, because that's very UNICEF kind of terminology. As for the SDG kind of ladder, service ladder, let's look at the people who live in a very water scarcity areas, having a service level, very poor service levels. Those are most vulnerable people and living in a very extreme vulnerable condition. So we want to go and support those peoples. With this, I plead all our sector partners, including the government, private sector, CSO partners, to join hand with UNICEF and see how we can ensure the water secure kind of life for the children's in coming days. Thank you. Over from my side.
Thank you, Mr. Prakash, for your comprehensive presentation on the water security for all. We now move on to our last speaker, Ms. Maheen Malik, Pakistan Coordinator for Alliance for Water Stewardship. Over to Ms. Maheen.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. I hope everybody is doing well. Can we have the presentation, please, Faria? Firstly, I'd like to thank everybody who's joined us today and has taken out the time. And I'd also like to thank Water Aid for inviting me. We're not going to go in a lot of introductions at the moment, and we're directly going to delve into the presentation so that we have maximum content in the smallest period of time. So welcome, everybody. I would probably be discussing the need for water stewardship and what Alliance for Water Stewardship is. For a lot of you who've heard what water stewardship is, or for instance, don't know what water stewardship is, or basically interchangeably use it with water conservation or water management, I think it's time we kind of clarify what the terminology means. But first, I think we're going to discuss why is there a need for water stewardship. I think reading all the comments and listening to all the prior presentations, we've kind of understood that water is a shared resource and that we haven't worked on it, all of us together, to a greater degree, which means that a lot of the work that is being done all around the globe or in Pakistan on water is pretty much in silos. So even if the government is working on water, it's doing it independently, or for instance, if the private sector is involved in it, it's doing it on its own, and there's no collaboration, or for instance, there is no learning or sharing of this information among all these different bodies. And then again, there is the civil society organization and a lot of NGOs like Agahi and WWF Pakistan and many others who are also working on water. But then again, they're also doing it in silos. So it's very important that we realize that considering that water is a shared resource, we need to manage and work together in order to achieve what we want to achieve by 2030 when we talk about SDG 6 or other where water is a big part of the SDG system. Secondly, I think considering that we are, all of us realize that there is climate change, I think one of the indicatives of that is the changing weather patterns that we're having, or for instance, the pandemic itself with the zoonotic spillover and with the floods and the droughts that are happening at very unprecedented times. in areas which we would have never considered for it to happen. I think the biggest example of it is for people who live in Karachi. They kind of realize how the rains have been hitting and kind of causing floods. And that is something that has not been hitting just because of nature, but also because how we are managing our response towards it. So for that, all of that requires a very consistent approach. And that is why we're going to talk about that water stewardship is needed because it has that consistent approach, and that also needs to be acknowledged equally by the public sector, but also by the private sector, because I've seen a lot of comments where they say, how do we kind of go about mobilizing the private sector for water? And I think that is something that I'm going to be telling you about. How does the private sector move towards talking about water and how they could kind of contribute towards it? And obviously, considering whoever is working towards water, they need to be recognized as good water stewardships and would want to be rewarded accordingly. Priya, could we move on to the next slide? With that, I think it's important. Can we have 2 more clicks, Fariha, so that we could kind of see the entire picture? I think it's very important that we first of all clarify what water stewardship is and how we define it. So according to the Alliance for Water Stewardship, the use of water that is socially and culturally equitable, which means it is available for all of us in whatever stratas of economic divisions we're living in, it is available for all of us. It is environmentally sustainable. It's not just available for us today, it is also, and it should also be available for us and for our future generations. And see, it has to be economically beneficial. For a lot of the private sectors, I think they know that water is a big part of their input, and it's actually a big part of their industries, which is also being used. But with that being said, it's very important that all of this is achieved through a stakeholder inclusive process. Not just all of us working on water exclusively or independently, but all of us working on water together, which means it's not just the onus or the responsibility of the government or the private sector or the NGO sector, but all of us together. And be it involving not just site, but catchment-based actions. For a lot of the private sectors or for a lot of organizations who work with water, they realize that they take a lot of initiatives, let that be with regards to efficiency or improving water quality, or for instance, giving or advocating about WASH on their particular site, but nobody talks about what happens when they move out of their site and they go within the vicinity where their site is actually located. But when we talk about water stewardship, and when, for instance, an organization wants to work on water stewardship through Alliance for Water Stewardship, they have to take steps that are not just based in their own fence line, but they have to move outside of it within their vicinity where their organization or where their factory or industry is actually placed. And this is how we define water stewardship, which very much encompasses water conservation and water management, but cannot be interchangeably used as it is used in previously or has been used in the past. Priya, can we move to the next slide, please? And can we have another click? Now, this is where we kind of bring in Alliance for Water Stewardship, and we tell you that Alliance for Water Stewardship is actually 2 things. Alliance for Water Stewardship is a standard system. It's a voluntary standard system that provides a framework on how to do water stewardship. And B, it is a global membership alliance, as the name suggests. It brings different actors globally as well as locally, from different businesses, from public sector organizations, from civil society organizations. They bring all these members together who've then developed this organization of AWS. And then they've kind of defined and developed this framework of how to go and do water stewardship. And it's not just that they've kind of developed it and they've developed it in silos. They developed it with constant consultations in between them so that they could also learn from each other. It's not a standard that has been put in place that was, for instance, made in 2014 and has never been improved after that. But it's a robust system where it is constantly updated, seeing what is required and what the conditions are around us accordingly as well. So it's very important that when we're doing all of this work and when we're doing water, when we're dealing and taking these different initiatives with water, it's very important that we share these experiences with each other, because in a lot of this sharing, that is where we learn from each other. Freya, can we move to the next slide? So this alliance then had developed this framework of doing water stewardship, and it kind of tells you, and it makes it accessible, and it provides you the how for sites or organizations to implement water stewardship and how they can kind of holistically move towards water. And when we talk about holistically working on water, you would not just be working towards WASH, for instance, but you would also be working and you will also be working on sustainable water balance. You will also be working on good water quality. You would also be working on good water governance and important water related areas, along with all the WASH that is in your facility and outside your facility. And this standard, for all of you who is interested to know how do we go and start about and where do we go and download this, you can go and download the standard from our website. It's absolutely free of cost. You can go and fill in your details and then download the standard. And that standard comes with a guidance document as well that tells you how do you go about understanding this entire standard and then implementing it. And where do you kind of start off? We also give trainings in that so that there's a better understanding for all of this and you can kind of start off your stewardship journey. But this kind of makes it accessible for any of the private sector or the public sector to kind of understand where do they start their water stewardship journey from. And it very holistically answers, the standard because it's built around those 5 steps where you understand what you gather and understand your water data, not just for your site, but outside your site as well, having that basin approach. You then commit and plan and develop your water stewardship plans. You then implement that standard. You evaluate what you're doing to see if, for instance, what all the actions and initiatives and actions that you've taken, are they actually working for your community, for your site, or should you want to go back and improve them? Because it's a hit and trial method by the end of the day. And then you start off, because transparency is key in all of this, you then start off by communicating and disclosing the work you're doing. So this kind of brings you to what the AWS has to offer you. Faria, can we go to the next slide, please? So around for all of the organizations from the public sector, from the private sector, as well as from the NGO sector who've been working on water stewardship for the past couple of years, they've kind of built together this Pakistan Water Stewardship Network, which is the platform to kind of improve and advance credible water stewardship. So this is platform which obviously has been running virtually for the last year because of the COVID situation. But a year before that, and all the years before that, we've been doing it in person. So the concept of having this platform is to engage all these different stakeholders so that they could clearly talk about water and the kind of actions that they're taking within their vicinity and outside their vicinity, and also to increase awareness on water stewardship. Secondly, the idea of this platform is also to develop demonstratable projects to kind of highlight what is the best approach that can be taken while using this framework. And obviously utilizing capacities of different individuals who sit on these forums and then have this expertise on water or, for instance, environment, talk about how we can drive and uptake the credible advancement of water stewardship. Faria, can we move to the next slide? So technically, the Pakistan Water Stewardship Collaboration is something that we run on a yearly basis so that these different actors on, who are kind of using the AWS standard or, for instance, who are working on water stewardship can then come together to discuss their ideas and share that knowledge as well. So the entire concept obviously is aligning the public and the private sector on the same guidelines, because at the moment we have a lot of responsibility on the government who needs to work and who is kind of working in developing a lot of infrastructure around water, let that be with regards to water treatment systems or access to clean drinking water facilities. And obviously they're using the integrated water resource management. But then again, how do we go and involve and mobilize the private sector? This is where the water stewardship standard or the framework comes in. And this is where you also use it so that you could mobilize the private sector. Why are them using the standard or the framework? And then both those organizations or both the systems coming together on the PWSN platform to kind of discuss it so that we have a basic system which is same all across these different organizations, discussing what the challenges are through the same system that has been put by the AWS standard itself. Fariha, I think with that, we're going to wrap up. For all of you who have more questions, can directly contact me on my email address, which is maheen@a4ws. .org, or can directly go and check the website. I am going to just post the link to the website just here in the comment section for those of you who want to check it out. Can we move to the next slide, Fariha? Can we have another 2 clicks? This kind of brings us to the vision and the mission of the organization, what AWS has, and that is to have a water secure world that enables people and culture and businesses and nature to prosper, not just now, but obviously in the future as well, because we want to make all of this sustainable, but to also ignite and nurture global and local leadership. We have to realize that water is very much local, and it needs to have all those actions and all those ideas at a local level so that they are recognized and we are able to secure the social and cultural and environmental value and the economic value of fresh water that it is. Faria, can we have another click? And obviously, the most important part of all of this is that it cannot be done alone, but the foundation of the AWS system is itself the multi-stakeholder governance that we're kind of talking about. And that brings us to all of the ways that, using the framework can kind of link it to the SDGs that we have as the target for 2030, which is not just providing clean water and sanitation, but because water becomes a major part of your SDG 2, your SDG 7, your SDG 8, 9, 11, 12, 13, and 17. So all of these SDGs are important and can be obviously worked towards when we're using the Alliance for Water Stewardship framework and when we're kind of working together for it. So I think with that, I'm going to wrap up since it's already 12. If you have any more questions, and for instance, if there is any more information, you can always contact me, but you can also go and check the website. It's very comprehensive. And I hope that we're all here to discuss valuing water. I hope we value water when we go home and when we go back to our offices. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Maheen. Very excellent presentation and very quick. I'm sorry we have gone a bit above our time frame that we have planned. If you could bear with us for another few minutes, we can just take quickly some questions. And I see that we had already had question on valuing water and private sector engagement, and that was very well covered with by 3 of our speakers actually. So if you have any more question, if you could write it in the chat box, and if you could direct it to the speaker, that will save us time. And after that, after a few minutes, I'm going to run a video message from our State Minister of Climate Change on the World Water Day. So while we prepare that to share the screen, if there's any message, any question, please write it in the chat box. I don't see any question. I think presentations were very clear, very crisp. So we got all the our questions and queries already addressed. So I think I'll just move on to the video message.
Just a comment from Sharmeen Tariq in the chat box. I mean, she emphasizes on water conservation and now calls upon everyone to go for water conservation as our own responsibility. I think, yes, we all should. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and just to add on, like, the value of water is not you define, I think it's Maheen already mentioned that one, but thinking that how water is managed and shared, because it's not about something. If you look at the household, it's a different. If you look at the schools, it's a different. It's also matter your life, your livelihood, your culture, your well-being. So it's all about, it's very complex, and how you determine the value of water. So basically, it determines the value of water, how are you going to manage and use that water. So just because I've seen some of those questions around the value of water, And the other one is private sector engagement. I guess it was already answered, but somehow I feel that, the private sector engagement, traditionally, we've been looking at the private sector as of our partners, just looking at the just corporate social responsibility, CSR. But now we really need to think beyond CSR, because they are our very, development partners. They are the one like going to reach out to those people which are not very much well served, because it's all about joining hands together. It's not about just a CSR. So let's see how we're going to engage the private sector in a meaningful way, and even looking at the blended kind of financing, because the finance is always, I mean, there's not enough finance, not adequate. So we really need to look at that kind of blended finance, how we can go ahead with the private sector, whether it's a big kind of like private sectors or it's a small local level kind of like private sectors. So that's what I see, that the private sector role is coming out more prominently as we move forward. And definitely mobilization of fund is everyone's responsibilities. So I think there are some those questions around those areas. So I just thought of it. Answering those questions. Over.
I see there's a question from Mr. Abdul Basit, that how they connect with individuals and companies like UNICEF, Water Aid, having solutions on WASH. So if someone would like to reply on that.
Can I come in here?
Can we explain a bit more around that? Who is this? Abdul?
Yeah, if you may allow, I can speak.
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah, okay.
But
so first
make it
of all,
brief, please.
yeah. First of all, wishing everyone a happy Water Day. The thing is that, for example, if a company wants to introduce or work with organizations like UNICEF or Water Aid, with solutions which are locally produced, or, with, for example, we work with an organization by the name of Ligzil, who are doing work in Africa and, a lot of work in Asia as well. But we haven't been able to connect with the key people in these organizations. And similarly, we as Beta Pipes even have been a long supplier of UNICEF, but there's a gap. But now when we try to reconnect, it's not only a business case, when we see the numbers of children dying every year because of diarrhea and other things. So it's just that how we can connect, and whether it's us or any other company who wants to add value, whether it's on a rural or urban level, how we can, work together on this. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Ligzil, just giving an example of the Ligzil, I mean, like UNICEF, we have this global kind of like on this some sort of partnership, right? Because I know that I have already worked in Africa and other countries. That's what I have seen. There's some those kind of like going around in those countries. But in the case of Pakistan, Kamran, are you there? Can you share some of those? Like, is there any those kind of partnerships happening here in Pakistan? Or is there any opportunity? I think I have a Kamran, my colleague here, who's really working around the private sector. Yes, Kamran.
Yeah, thank you very much. Not that I know Prakash Sahab in Pakistan.
Okay. So probably we can have that lateral discussions, but the Ligzil is like globally, we have seen, I know that we have been working with the Ligzil at the global level.
Yeah. Yes, we actually connected with Mr. Kitka Goyal at the time, but we could not proceed. So that's why I'm saying that, it would be very nice. And we have developed some other solutions as well, which are perfectly workable locally and regionally in Pakistan. And it's not only us, I think they are sustainable. They can be done by some other companies as well, and even people on their individual level. So it's not something, you know, like a brand specific thing. But yes, Lixil, of course, we can work on that, and I'll be grateful if somehow we can connect. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Abdul Basit. I'm sorry, we're running out of time here, so we'll just wrap up with the video message from our Minister of State on Climate Change, Mr. Tajgul.
I think this video is on mute. Please see it.
वर्ल्ड वाटर डे है। मैं अपने तमाम पाकिस्तानी को ये कहना चाहती हूँ कि नेचुरल रिसोर्सेज जो हमें अल्लाह ताला ने दी हुई है, हमें इसको किस तरीके से प्रोटेक्ट करना है, ज़ाया नहीं करना, क्योंकि हमारी आबादी बहुत ज़्यादा है और हमारा जो इनसफिशिएंट एग्रीकल्चर सिस्टम है वो सही तरीके से हम पानी को ठीक नहीं कंज्यूम कर रहे और इसी तरीके से हमारी ज़रूरियात बहुत ज़्यादा है और क्लाइमेटिक चेंजेस की वजह से हमारे ग्लेशियर जो है बहुत तेज़ी से पिघल रहे हैं। IMF कहता है और UNDP कहता है कि पाकिस्तान ऑलरेडी है उन ममालिक में शामिल है जिसको सबसे ज्यादा पानी की कमी का सामना 2025 में करना पड़ेगा और ऑलरेडी पाकिस्तान में पानी के मसाइल शुरू है। लिहाजा हमें पानी की कदर करनी चाहिए। जो हमारी मिनिस्टर ऑफ क्लाइमेट चेंज है वो प्राइम मिनिस्टर इमरान खान की विजन के मुताबिक एक नेशनल एक्शन प्लान बना चुकी है जिसमें हम अपने ग्लेशियर्स को प्रोटेक्ट करने के साथ साथ पानी को जाया न करने के लिए और जो हमारे SDGs है उसके ऊपर अमल करने के लिए सबों के साथ भी हम ताकीद करें कि अपने टारगेट को क्लीन ड्रिंकिंग वाटर को हमारे लोगों तक कैसे पहुंचाना और पानी को जाया नहीं करना। लिहाजा आप सबसे मेरी अपील है कि इस कुदरत को जो एक नेमत जो अल्लाह ताला ने हमें दी है इस तोहफे को प्लीज जाया ना करें और अपनी आबादी के बढ़ते हुए मसाइल के लिहाज से और हमारे क्लाइमेटिक चेंजेस की वजह से पानी को जाया होने से बचाइए। वर्ल्ड वाटर डे पे हमें ये अहद करना चाहिए कि पानी को ज़रूरियात ज़िंदगी के लिए सिर्फ इस्तेमाल करना है, इसका इसराफ और इसको ज़ाया बिल्कुल नहीं करना। बहुत शुक्रिया।
A part of Sustainable Development Goal is to provide water and sanitation for all. While we are yet to achieve it, this makes it all the more imperative to preserve water. With that note, I would like to finish this webinar today with thanking all the participants for their comments, for questions, and thank you so much to our valuable speakers, Mr. Munawar from Water Aid, Mr. Prakash from UNICEF, and Ms. Maheen Malik. Thank you so much. Allah Hafiz and good afternoon.
Thank you.